Alright, so this happened to me about a year ago. I was working for this small company that rented out office spaces in this old building downtown. You know the type: high ceilings, creaky floors, and that musty smell like it's been around for ages. My job was pretty straightforward, mostly just administrative stuff, but sometimes I'd have to go into the storage areas to grab files or supplies. One day, my boss asked me to go down to the basement and find some old records from, 5 years ago. The building had this weird basement level that nobody really liked going to. It was dark, the lighting was terrible, and it had these narrow hallways that seemed to go on forever. But I didn't think much of it at the time, so I grabbed the keys and headed down. The elevator ride to the basement was always creepy. It was one of those old, rickety ones that made all sorts of noises when it moved. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the hallway and flicked on the flashlight on my phone since the lights down there were pretty dim. The hallway was lined with doors, each leading to different storage rooms, maintenance areas, and who knows what else. I started making my way to the storage room we usually used, but as I was walking, I noticed this door I hadn't seen before. It was a bit further down the hallway, kind of hidden around a corner. It was one of those plain, unmarked doors, no labels or signs, just a metal door with a handle. I stopped for a second, thinking maybe I should ignore it and just get on with what I was supposed to be doing, but my curiosity got the best of me. So I walked over to the door and tried the handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. It opened with a bit of a creak, revealing a dark room beyond. I hesitated for a moment but decided to take a look. I stepped inside and immediately felt this drop in temperature. It was noticeably colder in there, almost like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The air felt heavy, and there was this faint, musty smell that made me want to hold my breath. I used my phone's flashlight to look around. The room was small, with a low ceiling and walls that seemed to close in the further I went. It was mostly empty, just some old, rusty shelves with a few dusty boxes. It didn't look like anyone had been in there for years. But then something caught my eye at the back of the room. Another door. This door was different. It was a plain wooden door with no handle or lock, just a simple push door. I walked over and pushed it open, half expecting it to be some kind of closet or something. But what I saw on the other side made my stomach drop. It was another hallway, but this one was different from the basement hallway I'd just come from. The walls were this sickly yellow color, and the floor was covered in this old stained carpet. It had this weird, almost clinical smell to it, like cleaning products mixed with something rotten. I hesitated, but my curiosity was too strong to resist. I stepped through the doorway into the hallway, thinking I'd just take a quick look and then go back. As soon as I stepped in, the door behind me closed. Not slammed or anything, just quietly clicked shut. I turned around to
open it back up, but there was no handle on this side. I started to feel a bit uneasy, but I figured maybe it was just some kind of maintenance corridor or something, and I'd find another way out. I walked down the hallway, shining my flashlight around. The place was completely silent. No hum of machinery, no distant voices, just the sound of my footsteps on the carpet. It was like I'd stepped into some kind of abandoned part of the building. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever.
with occasional turns and intersections, but no doors or windows, nothing to indicate where I was. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes, I started to get this feeling of unease, like something was off. The corridor was starting to mess with my sense of direction. I tried to remember the turns I'd taken, but everything looked the same. Every hallway was identical to the last, the same yellow walls, the same dim lighting, and the same awful smell. I decided to turn back and head the way I came, but when I did, the hallway just kept going. It didn't lead back to the door I'd come through. It was just more of the same. I started to panic a bit, my heart racing as I walked faster, turning corners at random, hoping to find a way out. The more I walked, the more I realized this place was like a maze. It didn't make sense. I should have reached the end of the hallway by now, or at least found another door, but it was just endless. I started to run, hoping to stumble across something that would make sense, but all I found were more hallways. The walls seemed to close in on me, the ceiling felt lower, and the air was getting thicker, harder to breathe. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against one of the walls. I was trying to stay calm, to think rationally about what was happening, but it was getting harder. My phone's battery was draining fast, and I didn't want to be stuck in this place in complete darkness. I had to find a way out. I kept moving, slower this time, trying to keep my bearings. I marked the walls with a pen I found in my pocket, hoping to see if I was going in circles. But every time I thought I was making progress, I'd come across one of my marks in a place I was sure I hadn't been before. It was like the place was shifting, changing behind my back. I don't know how long I wandered those halls. It felt like hours. My legs were getting tired and my phone was almost dead. I tried to stay calm, but the silence was getting to me. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing echoing in my ears. And then I started to hear something else. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it got louder the more I listened. It was this faint, distant sound, like someone shuffling around. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone in here. I stopped and listened, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but it seemed to echo from all directions. I started moving again, this time more carefully, trying not to make any noise. The sound seemed to follow me, always just out of sight. I tried to move faster, but the sound kept pace, like it was deliberately staying just far enough away to keep me on edge. Then, up ahead, I saw it. Another door. It looked like a regular office door, with a handle and everything. I rushed towards it, hoping it was the way out, but when I got closer, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a small glass window on the door, and behind it, I could see a shadowy figure standing perfectly still. I froze, my mind racing. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there behind the door, like it was waiting for me. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the door, and turned around to go back the way I came. But the sound was behind me now, closer this time. I started running, not caring where I was going anymore, just wanting to get away. I turned corners at random, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I didn't stop until I was out of breath, my lungs burning, and my legs feeling like they were about to give out. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, and that's when I saw it. The same door I had come through. The wooden door with no handle. I don't know how it got there, or if I'd somehow looped around, but I wasn't going to question it. I ran up to it and pushed it open, stumbling into the small, cold room from before. I slammed the door shut behind me and stood there, panting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The room was just as I'd left it, empty and cold, with the exit door on the other side. I didn't waste any time. I ran across the room, threw the door open, and bolted down the hallway back to the elevator. I must have looked like a complete mess when I got back to the office. My boss asked me if I found the records, but I just mumbled something about not being able to find them and went straight to my desk. I couldn't get the image of that hallway out of my mind, or the figure behind the door. I never went back to that basement after that. In fact, I quit that job not long after. I didn't tell anyone what happened, mostly because I didn't think they believed me. Who would believe something like that? A maze of endless hallways hidden in the basement of an old office building? But I know what I experienced. I know that feeling of being watched, of being followed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that door again. If I'd kept wandering those halls until my phone died and I was left in the dark. I try not to think about it too much, but every now and then, when I walk by a plain, unmarked door, I get this chill down my spine, like it's waiting for me to open it, to step back into those back rooms. And I wonder if there are others out there, other places with doors leading to nowhere, just waiting for someone curious enough to step through. I never thought much about the back rooms of places like Subway. They're just storage spaces, right? Places where they keep the extra supplies, cleaning products, maybe an old chair or two. But that night, I learned there's something unsettling about them. Something you don't notice until you're there, alone, and the world outside feels a million miles away. It was a Thursday evening, and I was dead tired. I had just finished a long day at work and didn't feel like cooking, so I decided to stop by Subway on my way home. It was one of those locations that's open 24/7, tucked away on a quiet street. You know the kind, almost always empty, even during the day. I walked in, the bell over the door chiming to signal my arrival. The place was deserted, save for a lone employee behind the counter, looking just as tired as I felt. I ordered my usual, a foot-long with turkey, lettuce, and a ton of olives. The guy behind the counter made small talk, but it was clear he wasn't really in the mood either. After he handed me my sandwich, I took a seat in the corner, far from the counter, where I could just be alone with my thoughts for a bit. As I was eating, I noticed something odd. The guy behind the counter kept glancing toward the back room door. It was slightly ajar, and every time he walked past it, he'd peek in quickly and then look away, like he was checking on something but didn't really want to. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my food, but it was hard not to notice. There was this low, mechanical hum coming from the back, a sound that didn't quite fit with the usual ambiance of a subway. I shrugged it off as just being tired and maybe a bit paranoid. You know how your mind plays tricks on you when you're exhausted. But then he came over to my table. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" he asked, looking nervously at the door again. I nodded, a bit thrown off. "Sure. What's up?" "I need to go to the restroom, but someone needs to watch the front for a minute. Just, if anyone comes in, tell them I'll be right back." It seemed like a strange request, but I figured he just really needed a break. I agreed, and he darted to the restroom, leaving me there, alone with the counter and that half-open door to the back room. A few minutes passed. No one came in, and I was starting to zone out, the day's exhaustion catching up with me. But then I heard it, a faint rustling sound from the back room, like someone shifting around boxes or maybe just moving things around. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just the old building settling or the sound of the refrigerators kicking in. But then it happened again, this time louder, like something had actually fallen over. I glanced at the door, now slightly more open than it had been before. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to convince myself that it was just the employee messing around back there, but I knew he was still in the restroom. The sound continued, sporadic and unsettling, like someone or something was shifting around, just out of sight. Against my better judgment, I stood up and walked toward the counter, peering into the dimly lit back room. It was mostly shadow, with only the faintest outline of shelves and boxes visible. The humming noise grew louder the closer I got, and the air felt different, heavier, like stepping into a different atmosphere. I took a deep breath, telling myself to just go back to my seat and wait for the guy to return. But something caught my eye, a shadow moving deeper in the back room. It wasn't just the usual flicker of light or a trick of the eye. It was a definite shape, darker than the rest, sliding behind the shelves. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky, even to me. There was no response, just the continued humming and the occasional rustle of something. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a rat, or the employee messing with me for some reason, but it didn't feel right. I was about to back away when the restroom door opened, and the employee came back. He looked at me, then at the back room door, and his face went pale. "Did you hear anything?" he asked quietly, almost like he was afraid of the answer. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something's back there." He swallowed hard and walked over to the door, peering in cautiously. I could see his hands shaking. He didn't say anything, just closed the door and locked it. We don't go back there after a certain time," he finally said, his voice barely steady. "The manager told us not to, said it's not safe." I blinked at him, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean, not safe?" He shook his head, looking genuinely terrified now. "Just, it's complicated. You should probably go." And that was it. He wouldn't say another word about it. I grabbed my stuff and left, but as I walked out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with that place. I kept thinking about that shadow, the way it moved like it had a purpose, like it was aware. Over the next few days, I couldn't get it out of my mind. I started doing some digging, trying to find out more about that specific subway location. It turned out there had been a few incidents there over the years. Employees reported hearing strange noises, items going missing, things being moved around in the back room when no one was supposed to be there. A few even claimed to have seen things, shadows, figures, things that didn't make sense. The most disturbing part was that several people had gone missing in the area over the past decade. Not many, just a few, but it was enough to make me wonder. There were rumors, of course, as there always are with these things. Some said the place was built on an old tunnel system. Others claimed it was some kind of vortex or portal to somewhere else. I know it sounds crazy, and maybe it is, but after what I experienced, I can't just write it off as nothing. I've been back to that subway a few times, but I never go near the back room. I make sure to get my food and leave as quickly as possible. And every time I pass by the counter, I can feel it. That same heaviness in the air, that low hum that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I don't know what's in that back room, and honestly, I don't want to find out. But if you ever find yourself in a subway late at night, and the employee asks you to keep an eye on things while they step away, just be careful, because some doors are better left closed, and some shadows are better left in the dark. So this happened to me not too long ago, and it still freaks me out whenever I think about it. It was a Saturday, and I had planned to go to this office building where my friend worked. He had mentioned something about some old equipment in the storage room that he thought I might be interested in. Stuff like old computers and retro tech. I was into collecting that kind of thing, so I figured, why not? I got there in the late afternoon. The building was mostly empty, given that it was the weekend, and the place had this eerie silence to it. My friend had given me the access code to get in, and he told me where to find the storage room. I stepped inside and took the elevator down to the basement level. The ride down felt longer than it should have, but I didn't think much of it at the time. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into this long, dimly lit hallway. It wasn't the most welcoming place. The walls were this bland beige color, and the fluorescent lights overhead gave off this annoying buzzing sound. There was no one around, just me and this seemingly endless corridor. I started walking, looking for the storage room my friend had mentioned. After a while, I realized I had no idea where I was. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, with no signs or doors in sight. I thought maybe I had taken a wrong turn, so I decided to turn back. But when I did, the hallway behind me was different. It was like the layout had changed. Now there were turns and corners that hadn't been there before. My heart started racing a bit, but I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe I had just gotten mixed up. I kept walking, hoping to find some kind of exit or at least a door to another part of the building. But the more I walked, the stranger things got. The air felt heavy, and the lights seemed to flicker ever so slightly. It felt like I was walking in circles, but every time I thought I recognized a spot, it would be slightly different, like the walls had shifted or the lights were a different shade of white. Eventually, I came across a door. It was one of those heavy, industrial-looking doors with a small window in it. I figured it might lead back to the main building, so I pushed it open and stepped through. On the other side was another hallway, but this one was different. The walls were covered in this old, faded wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The carpet on the floor was stained and worn, and the air was musty, like I had just walked into an old, abandoned house. I started to feel really uneasy. There was no way this could be part of the same building. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe call my friend, but there was no signal. Great, just what I needed. I turned on the flashlight and started walking down the hallway, hoping to find a way out. The further I went, the more it felt like the place was messing with my head. I would walk for what felt like minutes, only to end up back where I started. It was like the hallways were looping, trapping me in some kind of maze. At one point, I thought I heard something, like a faint humming sound coming from somewhere down the corridor. It was hard to tell where it was coming from, but it definitely wasn't comforting. I picked up the pace, trying to find a way out. I turned corner after corner, but it was all the same. Every hallway looked identical to the last. The same old wallpaper, the same flickering lights, the same unsettling silence. I was starting to panic. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from behind the walls. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon another door. This one was different from the last. Smaller, almost like a maintenance door. I hesitated for a moment, but I didn't have many options. I needed to get out of there. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped, filled with old office supplies and dusty boxes. It looked like a storage closet that hadn't been used in years. I looked around, hoping to find something useful. A map, a phone, anything that could help me figure out where I was. But there was nothing, just more of the same old, abandoned junk. And then I noticed something strange. At the back of the room, behind a stack of boxes, there was another door. It was half hidden, like it wasn't meant to be found. I pushed the boxes aside and opened the door. It led to another hallway, but this one was different from the others. The walls were bare concrete, and the floor was this cold, hard tile. It felt more like a basement or a utility corridor than part of an office building. I stepped inside and started walking. The hallway was narrow and claustrophobic, with no doors or windows, just this long, unending passage that seemed to stretch on forever. The only sound was my footsteps echoing off the walls. I kept going, feeling like I had no choice. It was either that or go back to the maze of hallways, and I wasn't about to do that. As I walked, the air grew colder, and the lights got dimmer. The further I went, the darker it got, until I was walking in almost complete darkness, relying on my phone's flashlight to see. I was on edge, every little noise making me jump. I felt like I was being led somewhere, like the building itself was guiding me deeper and deeper into its depths. Finally, I saw something up ahead, a light, a faint glow coming from around a corner. I hurried towards it, hoping it was a way out, but when I turned the corner, I froze. What I saw wasn't an exit, it was another room, a large, open space with high ceilings. In the center of the room was this huge, industrial-looking machine. It was covered in dust and rust, and it gave off this low, mechanical hum. I didn't know what the machine was, but it didn't look like it belonged in an office building. It looked like something out of a factory or a laboratory. There were pipes and wires running all over it, and these strange symbols etched into the metal. I had this overwhelming sense of dread, like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. I stepped closer, trying to get a better look. As I did, I noticed something else. There was a door on the far side of the room, and next to it was a small window. I walked over to the window and looked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a room, just like the one I was in. Same machine, same symbols, same everything. But there was something else in there. A figure, standing in the shadows. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a person. They were just standing there, staring back at me through the window. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, like they were watching me, waiting for something. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I turned towards the door, desperate to get out. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was sealed shut or locked from the other side. I started pounding on the door, yelling for help, but there was no response, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. I turned back to the window, but the figure was gone. The room on the other side was empty, just like the one I was in. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped, with no way out. I sank to the floor, feeling hopeless and terrified. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I heard something. A sound, faint at first but getting louder. It was coming from the hallway behind me. I got up and walked over to the door, pressing my ear against it. The sound was getting closer, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who or what was out there, but I didn't want to find out. I looked around the room, trying to find a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Just the machine in the center and the door that wouldn't open. The footsteps were right outside the door now, just on the other side. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was out there to come in, but it didn't. Instead, the door slowly creaked open, just a crack. I couldn't see anything, just darkness on the other side. I waited, not daring to move, and then a voice, a whisper, so quiet I could barely hear it. It said my name, just my name, like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted towards the door, yanking it open and running down the hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just kept running, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't know how I found my way out, but somehow I did. I burst through a door and found myself back in the main part of the building. It was like I had stepped out of a nightmare and back into reality. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I just kept running, all the way to my car, and I didn't stop until I was miles away. I don't know what happened in those back rooms, and I don't want to know. All I know is that something was in there, something that wasn't supposed to be, and it knew my name.